Christmas morning should have been warm, full of laughter, lights twinkling on the tiny tree Jenny had set up with so much care, paper snowflakes taped just so. But silence ruled the apartment instead. Jenny woke up alone, the kind of stillness that feels wrong before your mind catches up. Sumit wasn't there. His phone had vanished with him. No argument, no slammed doors, just absence. And then it came. The call that made everything real, everything unavoidable. One sentence, softly spoken, that landed heavier than any scream or fight ever could. He wasn't planning to return until after the holidays. Jenny sat frozen, her chest tight, staring at the little tree and the carefully strung lights, suddenly noticing how hollow they felt. Years of patience, flights booked, hope pinned to vague promises, all condensed into this single, quiet moment. The holidays had always been her proof that love endured, proof that effort mattered. But now, that proof felt fragile. Was this the day patience finally ran out? She thought of all the seasons she had endured, all the moments where soon became the rhythm of their life together. Promises without timelines, agreement without presence, calm words instead of choices. And now, with Sumit gone and one phone call breaking the quiet, the pattern revealed itself in full. The waiting, the silence, the compromise. It hadn't been love alone holding things together. It had been delay disguised as patience, endurance framed as virtue. This morning didn't explode. It landed quietly, surgically, forcing Jenny to see what she had avoided for years. And just like that, the illusion she had built around hope started to crack. Wait till you see why this morning hit harder than any fight we've ever watched on screen. Jenny had spent countless hours trying to make a home feel like one, even when half the world seemed determined to remind her it wasn't. She learned early that Sumit lived in two worlds at once. The life in front of the cameras, filled with awkward smiles, nervous laughter, and endless promises. And the life dictated by parents, culture, and expectations that rarely included her. You know what I mean? Waiting years for clarity sounds exhausting. Flights, family dinners, long phone calls, negotiations that seemed endless. Every season built the same rhythm. Sumit would nod, agree, reassure, and then life would move on without a single concrete decision. From day one, it wasn't about romance alone. It was about compromise. Compromise framed as love, framed as patience, framed as endurance. Jenny's effort became monumental. Every smile, every tradition she tried to maintain was emotional labor stacked quietly on her shoulders. Sumit, meanwhile, became the master of calm. Calm words, calm exits, calm deflections, never confrontation, never a commitment that stuck. And the audience loved it early on because who doesn't root for patience and perseverance? But the pattern was already in motion. Delay became normalized. Absence became explanation enough. Every postponed promise added invisible weight, quietly tipping the scales toward frustration. Family interference was the glue holding this story in tension. Every gathering, every casual reminder of tradition, every objection became a tool that subtly enforced postponement. Sumit wasn't malicious. Allegedly, he was cautious, careful, trying to keep everyone safe, including Jenny. But caution became habitual. Habits became patterns. Patterns became a cage disguised as respect. And Jenny, she kept building hope, convinced that the next season, the next flight, the next promise would finally tip the scales. But the seasons kept repeating, and the clock kept moving. You could see the humor in it, too. Who else books Christmas flights across continents hoping for clarity that never comes? Who else decorates a tiny apartment like it's a palace, only to end up alone on the most festive morning of the year? The audience laughed nervously, unsure if it was relief, sympathy, or shock. Every camera cut, every awkward dinner, every nod of agreement from Sumit piled on tension, even while viewers chuckled. And then today arrived. Christmas, a day meant to anchor joy, suddenly became the ultimate pressure point. All the unresolved agreements, all the delayed promises, all the carefully maintained patience came to a single morning where absence could speak louder than words. You could feel the weight, even through the screen. Jenny's traditions, her rituals, her care, all magnified the tension because they highlighted what wasn't there. A choice, a clear commitment, a presence. And then it happened. Sumit stepped out quietly. No argument, no slam, no warning, just a calm exit that left the room heavier than any shout could. The pattern we'd seen for years played out again, but this time the stakes felt sharper. Was he stepping out for work? Family? Or was this another postponement dressed up as a temporary absence? Jenny, frozen in place, knew the answer might finally arrive. Or not. And just when you think it's another quiet morning, things are about to explode quietly instead. Jenny sat on the edge of the tiny living room couch, staring at the glow of the Christmas lights she had hung with meticulous care. Each bulb, each paper snowflake, each folded napkin carried memory and effort, proof that she tried to make this holiday meaningful. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet. Her chest tightened as she realized the quiet wasn't comforting, it was exposing. Sumit had stepped out earlier, supposedly for a call, and had yet to return. You could almost feel the tension radiating through the screen. This next moment will make you question if patience really is a virtue in this relationship. Every year, Jenny tried to maintain tradition. She decorated, she cooked, she called family back home, she smiled for the camera even when her heart wasn't fully in it. That emotional labor is invisible to most viewers, but it accumulates like weight on shoulders that weren't meant to carry it alone. Every nod, every polite reassurance from Sumit became a lesson in waiting. Vague promises and calm exits spoke louder than any fight ever could. You've seen fights on TV, right? Shouting, doors slamming, tears, apologies. This wasn't that. This was quieter, subtler, and far more damaging. Silence became a weapon, absence became a message, and hope became a habit that drained her identity slowly. You could see it in her posture, in the way she lingered near the phone, in the tight jaw, in the hesitation before checking messages again. Each movement, each glance at the clock, built tension. Waiting, initially framed as patience or devotion, turns into a prolonged exposure to uncertainty. What starts as noble effort gradually morphs into emotional exhaustion. Psychologically, humans assign meaning to hope. When hope is consistently deferred, it transforms into stress and self-doubt. Jenny's repeated investments in traditions and small gestures were meant to anchor love, but the love on the receiving end remained untested by choice. Sumit's behavior was careful, controlled. Calm nods, soft words, steady demeanor. Allegedly, he wanted to avoid conflict. But calmness without clarity allows avoidance to thrive. Every year, every season, every promise without a deadline normalized waiting as a strategy rather than a virtue. Jenny's audience rooted for her, thinking patience was heroic. Public optimism framed her as devoted, but private uncertainty eroded trust. Every gift, every call, every decoration became evidence not of reciprocated effort, but of imbalance. Then the phone rang. Not dramatically, not urgently, but softly, almost like a test. Jenny hesitated, then answered, catching only fragments. After the holidays, the voice said. That single phrase, floating in a soft tone, carried more weight than 1,000 arguments. After, the word itself became the encapsulation of everything deferred. It shifted responsibility to the future, kept options open, and left Jenny with clarity she hadn't sought. The tension thickened. Who benefits when patience becomes a trap? She had been nurturing the illusion that endurance equaled devotion. The truth hovered in that one call. Jenny followed Sumit's voice, hoping for answers, but finding only fragments. Each fragment revealed patterns we had watched for seasons. Agreement without presence. Calm without commitment. Listening without decision. Her hope was repeatedly used as a tool to protect someone else's comfort. Watching it unfold, even as a viewer, makes you question, are words without action still meaningful in a relationship built on postponement? Every gesture from Jenny that morning, checking the phone, adjusting the tree, calling family back home, was met with silence or vague reassurances. Each pause, each softly chosen phrase from Sumit added layers of suspense. Waiting becomes deceptive. It rewards endurance but erodes agency. What viewers initially cheered as patience slowly morphed into frustration, sympathy fatigue, and moral conflict. Does supporting patience mean enabling avoidance? Jenny's situation forced both the audience and herself to confront that question repeatedly. And then he returned, calm, collected, avoiding eye contact, explaining with phrases that seemed harmless at first: work stuff, family noise, allegedly routine. But in reality, those words reinforced the pattern: deflection instead of choice. Each vague answer, each delay, each careful phrasing served a purpose. It protected him and family expectations, while leaving Jenny to carry the cost of uncertainty. For years, these small interactions had trained her to hope harder, wait longer, and absorb emotional labor without reward. The room, once festive, now felt like a stage for invisible tension. The audience could sense the mismatch. On screen, Jenny smiled, laughed, maintained composure. Off camera, her awareness grew. She realized waiting had ceased to be a virtue and had become an expectation imposed by the patterns she had endured. Each light on the tree and each paper snowflake illuminated not joy, but the emotional price of deferred decisions. And just when it seemed the scene might settle into calm, another small hesitation, another vague answer, another moment of silence kept tension simmering. Jenny's mental calculus evolved. Patience without choice was draining. Endurance without alignment was unsustainable. Each layer of emotional complexity built suspense, made viewers question loyalty versus self-respect, hope versus clarity. The stakes escalated not through shouting, but through subtle behavioral patterns repeated over years. This morning, more than any argument, more than any dramatic exit ever could, revealed the cost of silent avoidance. Jenny's hope, patience, and emotional labor collided with Sumit's calm deflections, exposing a structural imbalance that had been years in the making. And as viewers, we were forced to ask ourselves the same question Jenny had to confront. How long is too long to wait? And when does patience stop being heroic and start being harmful? If you think patience was the hero here, think again. Every calm nod, every soft reassurance, every promise without a timeline stacked the stakes higher. Jenny's quiet endurance contrasted sharply with Sumit's careful avoidance, and that contrast kept the tension alive long after the cameras stopped rolling. The audience felt it. The actors lived it. And the story was far from over. Fans exploded online the moment Jenny posted her Christmas morning video. Threads lit up with comments expressing shock, empathy, and frustration. People weren't just reacting to a missing spouse, they were reacting to the weight of years of waiting, postponed promises, and emotional labor condensed into a single morning. "I would have left years ago," one commenter wrote. Another said, "She deserves clarity, not calm excuses." You could almost feel the collective exasperation of viewers who had tracked every delayed commitment, every vague promise, and every subtle avoidance over multiple seasons. Keep watching, because what he said next quietly rewrites everything we thought we knew. The discussion wasn't just about individual behavior, it exploded into debates on culture, family pressure, and age differences. Some defended Sumit, citing family expectations and traditional values, claiming that these external pressures explain, but do not excuse, his prolonged hesitation. Others argued that Jenny's endurance had limits, and that love alone cannot substitute for choice. Online, hashtags trended with questions. Would you still wait after 10 years? Is love enough when choice is delayed? The comments mirrored the tension we had been watching unfold on screen: patience tested by avoidance, Hope pitted against silence, and endurance weighed against personal agency. Social media also highlighted patterns viewers had recognized long before this Christmas morning. The calm deflections, the strategic silences, the tiny gestures of reassurance without commitment, they all replayed in clips and comment threads. Fans dissected every scene from previous seasons, linking past delays to the emotional pressure building toward this episode. Jenny's quiet diligence was praised repeatedly, while Sumit's careful politeness became a point of criticism. It wasn't about who was bad or good, it was about imbalance. Every vague word, every postponed plan, every soft excuse became evidence for the audience. Patience without choice creates emotional fatigue, even if framed as devotion. When the phone call clip circulated, viewers paused, replayed, and debated the single phrase that had the most weight after the holidays. Something so small, so subtle, suddenly became a focal point. Every user online pointed out how it encapsulated years of postponement and careful avoidance. Some fans theorized whether this line was intentional, a soft buffer to protect Sumit from conflict, or whether it revealed that Jenny's need for clarity was about to be ignored again. The tension wasn't just on screen anymore. It had migrated into feeds, stories, and comment threads where millions of watchers collectively held their breath. The audience also expressed frustration at how social norms are weaponized through delay. They noticed the invisible labor Jenny had been performing, keeping the apartment festive, maintaining connection with family, and silently managing hope. Viewers empathized deeply with her, not because of romance alone, but because they recognized the psychological toll of waiting indefinitely. Online debates often turned philosophical. Can love survive repeated postponement? At what point does enduring patience cross into emotional captivity? Comments poured in with personal stories mirroring Jenny's situation, turning the discussion into a wider commentary about relational expectations, gender dynamics, and cultural pressures. And yet, despite all the frustration, the collective audience was hooked. Every pause, every soft-spoken excuse, every non-committal answer was analyzed, memed, and debated. People noticed patterns that had been growing for years, and this Christmas morning acted as a magnifying glass. The calm politeness, the lack of confrontation, and the gentle avoidance, the same tactics that had kept Jenny waiting for so long, now played out for the audience in real time, forcing them to confront the costs of emotional labor. By the end of the day, discussion threads swelled with predictions. What would happen after the holidays? Would Jenny finally demand alignment between words and actions? Could long-term patience hold up under a lifetime of small postponements? Even casual viewers, who had only tuned in for the festive drama, were now emotionally invested in the larger psychological story. Keep watching, because what he said next quietly rewrites everything we thought we knew. The online chatter wasn't just gossip, it was a reflection of the episode's subtle brilliance. Social media mirrored the tension we had seen on screen, amplifying it. Viewers weren't only consuming content, they were interacting with it, dissecting behavior, and debating values. Jenny's journey from hope to clarity resonated far beyond the living room, highlighting how patterns of avoidance, deferred choice, and emotional labor play out both on screen and in real life. And as viewers scrolled, commented, and theorized, one subtle truth became impossible to ignore. This Christmas morning wasn't about a missing husband alone. It was about the accumulation of deferred choices, the toll of patience, and the power of clarity. Keep watching, because what he said next quietly rewrites everything we thought we knew. Christmas morning was supposed to be warm, filled with laughter, wrapping paper, and the smell of cinnamon. Instead, Jenny sat alone, surrounded by twinkling lights and carefully arranged ornaments, feeling the weight of absence pressing down. Every decoration she hung, every little ritual she maintained, suddenly felt like proof of effort falling into a void. This wasn't about a missing gift or a forgotten breakfast. It was the culmination of years of waiting, postponed conversations, and quiet compromises. And just when it seemed like another festive day would pass quietly, Jenny's phone rang. This one question changes everything, and forces a reckoning no camera can capture fully. Jenny had practiced patience for years. She had maintained hope through holidays, birthdays, and family visits. Each time Sumit delayed a decision, offered a vague promise, or prioritized others over her, she absorbed the frustration silently. Now, sitting among the holiday cheer she had meticulously created, that quiet endurance began to crack. The question she asked wasn't loud or dramatic, but it carried more weight than any argument could. What do you actually want? The room seemed to pause, the ornaments reflecting not just light, but the tension in her voice. Sumit's response, or lack of it, spoke volumes. He remained calm, avoiding eye contact, letting silence stretch between them like a fragile thread. He didn't argue, didn't storm off, didn't raise his voice. Instead, his habitual deflection, the polite brush-off that had kept Jenny in waiting for years, filled the space. Every pause, every hesitation, every careful phrasing was a mirror of the patterns viewers had watched unfold over seasons. His calm was not peace, it was avoidance, and Jenny had learned to read it all too well. Loneliness became palpable in the quiet room. Jenny's gaze moved from the tree to the neatly wrapped gifts, each one a reminder of effort without reciprocation. Emotional labor had never been so tangible. The hope invested, the traditions maintained, and the patience extended, all quietly unrecognized. The holiday amplified the imbalance, exposing the gap between what was said and what was done. This one question changes everything and forces a reckoning no camera can capture fully. The tension built as Jenny repeated herself, softer this time, almost pleading for clarity. Each word landed like a small hammer, chipping away at the walls of avoidance Sumit had carefully constructed. He shifted slightly, glanced at the phone, then at the tree, then back at her. A series of subtle gestures that spoke more than sentences ever could. For anyone watching, it was a silent countdown, a waiting game condensed into moments that felt eternal. What made this morning extraordinary wasn't shouting. It was the quiet truth emerging through contrast. Patience versus avoidance, presence versus absence, emotional labor versus deferred responsibility. Sumit's calm exterior concealed the storm beneath, the prioritization of cultural expectations, family obligations, and careful delay over decisive choice. For Jenny, this wasn't about tradition or sacrifice anymore. It was about reclaiming agency, demanding alignment between words and action. Viewers could feel the internal stakes rising. Each of Jenny's questions became a mini cliffhanger. Would he finally acknowledge her needs? Would he step into the responsibility he had postponed for so long? The camera couldn't capture the exact tremor in her voice, the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, or the subtle shift in household energy as deferred choices collided with reality. Yet the tension was undeniable. This one question changes everything and forces a reckoning no camera can capture fully. By the time the phone call ended and the ornaments glimmered in the morning light, Jenny had shifted. The patience that had once seemed virtuous now felt heavy, even constraining. The holiday, meant to highlight joy and togetherness, had become a crucible, exposing emotional patterns that had long simmered beneath the surface. In that quiet room, surrounded by decorations, rituals, and the echoes of deferred promises, a turning point had been reached. The day wasn't about gifts, it was about choice. Jenny's clarity contrasted sharply with Sumit's calm avoidance, leaving both on screen and viewers holding their breath for what would come next. The emotional balance had shifted, and the consequences of years of waiting, silence, and subtle deflection were finally laid bare. This one question changes everything and forces a reckoning no camera can capture fully. Jenny had been living in a world built on hope, where every vague promise and polite deflection from Sumit felt like a thread holding their relationship together. But on this Christmas morning, hope began to shift into awareness. Sitting in the quiet aftermath of her confrontation, she realized that years of waiting had not brought clarity. It had brought uncertainty, emotional weight, and slow erosion of trust. Each postponed choice, each unspoken decision, had stacked quietly like invisible bricks, shaping a structure that favored avoidance over action. Once clarity enters, patience loses power, and the rules of the relationship completely change. The moment Jenny asked the simple, powerful question, "What do you want?" it wasn't dramatic in tone, but it was seismic in consequence. That single line broke the invisible cycle that had kept her waiting for years. No more vague assurances, no more "we'll see," no more calm deflections that disguised indecision as thoughtfulness. It forced the relationship to stand face to face with honesty. In that pause, Jenny's agency emerged, a subtle but unstoppable force reshaping the dynamic. Sumit's hesitation, measured and careful, revealed what words had long avoided. He was caught between comfort, cultural expectations, and the reality of confronting choice. For viewers, the tension was palpable. Every twitch, every glance, every unspoken thought became part of the unfolding drama. Jenny's silent assessment of Sumit carried as much weight as any confrontation. Her mind worked quietly, weighing patterns of avoidance against years of emotional investment. Meanwhile, Sumit's repeated calm deflections, once a mechanism to preserve harmony, now appeared as erosion, chipping away at trust and certainty. The psychological stakes were high. What felt like patience had been slowly converted into unpaid emotional labor. The holiday setting amplified everything. The carefully arranged decorations, the scent of fresh pine, the ritualized joy of Christmas contrasted sharply with the emotional void that avoidance had created. Jenny had invested years maintaining hope and tradition, believing they would sustain connection. But clarity is a different currency. It forces recognition, demands presence, and reshapes power. By insisting on honesty, Jenny didn't just ask for an answer. She reclaimed the rules of her own life, refusing to let the inertia of postponement dictate her choices. Once clarity enters, patience loses power, and the rules of the relationship completely change. The behavioral patterns were clear, calm, polite, and measured avoidance had been a repeated strategy. Initially, it may have seemed harmless, even thoughtful. Over time, however, it became a subtle mechanism of control. Each delayed answer kept Jenny invested. Each vague reassurance maintained hope while deferring responsibility. The quiet accumulation of these patterns slowly undermined agency, leaving Jenny in a state of emotional limbo. Recognizing this was painful, but necessary. Awareness brought the kind of power waiting never could. Psychologically, the shift from waiting to clarity is transformative. Waiting allows ambiguity to linger, which can feel safe, even virtuous, because it avoids confrontation and preserves hope. Clarity, however, confronts reality directly. It exposes misalignment, forces choice, and demands engagement. Jenny's transition was not about anger or blame. It was about reclaiming control over her life, her decisions, and her expectations. The emotional labor she had carried silently could now be acknowledged and redirected, no longer unbalanced in silence. As Sumit finally responded, carefully measured words fell into the space she had carved with her question. The weight of deferred responsibility hung in the air, now made visible. Jenny's stance, steady and deliberate, reflected her shift from endurance to agency. Viewers could feel it too, the tension of years of waiting meeting the undeniable force of clarity. Each silent beat was a mini cliffhanger, each hesitation a confirmation that emotional balance was finally tilting. By the end of the moment, the rules of the relationship had changed. Jenny no longer operated under postponed choices, she operated under knowledge, awareness, and agency. The dynamic that had allowed calm avoidance to dominate her emotional landscape was broken. Once clarity enters, patience loses power, and the rules of the relationship completely change. The subtle tension, the weight of unspoken history, and the long pattern of deferred decisions had all led to this turning point. Jenny had moved from hope to clarity, from quiet endurance to deliberate agency. And as viewers, we were left not with drama alone, but with the sharp, compelling lesson of what happens when patience is tested against honesty and clarity. Jenny sat in the quiet of her living room, Christmas lights casting a soft glow over the ornaments she had spent hours arranging. The room was perfect, as always, but the meaning had shifted. This morning, she was alone. Not in anger, not in fight, but in a space of awareness. The years of hope, patience, and emotional labor were no longer invisible. Each decoration, each carefully timed call, each attempt to maintain optimism carried weight. And for the first time, Jenny recognized that weight for what it truly was. It wasn't just effort, it was investment, and it demanded recognition. The question now isn't about love, it's about choice, and what happens when waiting finally ends. The consequences of the morning were subtle but profound. Patterns that had been normalized over years, the calm deflections, postponed decisions, and polite silences, were now exposed in stark relief. Jenny understood the emotional cost of waiting, while Sumit faced the mirror of the choices he had delayed. For viewers, it was a moment that reframed what patience had looked like on screen. It wasn't virtuous endurance. It was an emotional treadmill that allowed avoidance to thrive while hope carried the weight. Fans online were divided, but deeply engaged. Sympathy for Jenny surged, frustration for Sumit ran high, and debates over cultural expectations, family influence, and deferred commitments lit up social media. People questioned the role of tradition versus personal agency, the balance of love against actionable choice. The question now isn't about love, it's about choice, and what happens when waiting finally ends. Fair-minded analysis shows that Sumit's hesitation wasn't purely selfish. Cultural norms, family obligations, and the pressure of expectations had influenced his behavior. His calmness and deferment may have been a strategy to avoid conflict or maintain harmony. Yet awareness of context does not erase impact. Jenny's experience remained real. Her uncertainty, the unpaid emotional labor, and the erosion of clarity were tangible consequences of prolonged avoidance. The tension between intention and effect was central. What is excusable in theory can be harmful in practice. As the morning continued, Jenny reflected on her own agency. She had preserved the rituals and traditions, yet the meaning behind them had changed. Christmas was no longer just a festive occasion, it was a mirror revealing patterns, choices, and consequences. Every ornament, every small act of care, now carried the duality of beauty and truth. Effort without reciprocity is labor. Clarity without compromise is liberation. The question now isn't about love, it's about choice, and what happens when waiting finally ends. Meanwhile, Sumit's perspective remained complicated. While he may have believed he was protecting harmony, maintaining calm, and navigating cultural obligations, the result was clear. Avoidance shifted the burden to Jenny, delayed emotional reckoning, and allowed hope to carry a weight it could not sustain indefinitely. The dynamic was no longer sustainable, and viewers could feel the tension lingering in every glance, every pause, every unsaid word. The unresolved future hung in the air. This Christmas morning did not end in a dramatic confrontation, but the consequences were unavoidable. Jenny's awareness had changed the rules, the patterns of postponement, the quiet deflections, and the deferred choices could no longer dominate unchecked. Both partners faced the reality that past behavior could no longer dictate emotional equilibrium. What would come next was unknown, and that uncertainty made every subsequent interaction charged with possibility. The question now isn't about love, it's about choice, and what happens when waiting finally ends. Even as the day ended, the tension lingered. Social media buzzed with speculation, fans dissected every moment, and Jenny herself processed a complex mix of relief, grief, and empowerment. The emotional cost of waiting had been made visible, the power of clarity asserted, and the implications for the relationship undeniable. The morning may have passed, but its echoes promised that the story was far from resolved. The unresolved nature of choice and consequence created a unique tension that would carry forward. Jenny had reclaimed agency, Sumit had to reckon with impact, and viewers were left with a lesson in emotional dynamics. Love alone cannot sustain a relationship without clear decisions and mutual accountability. The question now isn't about love, it's about choice, And what happens when waiting finally ends? This Christmas had shifted everything. The traditions remained, the decorations still gleamed, but the emotional landscape had changed. Jenny's clarity would guide her next moves. Sumit's choices, or continued hesitation, would define his, and the audience would watch, questioning their own definitions of patience, love, and agency. Christmas morning ended quietly, but the quiet was louder than any argument could have been. Jenny sat in her living room, surrounded by lights and ornaments, but what mattered most wasn't what she had decorated, it was what she had realized. Clarity had arrived like a verdict, exposing patterns that had been hidden under years of calm deflections, postponed choices, and polite silences. Jenny's patience had been tested for years, and for the first time, she wasn't just enduring, she was assessing, understanding, and reclaiming her agency. Silence no longer carried power, hope no longer masked imbalance, and traditions now reflected truth as much as celebration. Sumit's calm, once a shield, now revealed its cost. The emotional labor, the repeated delays, the vague promises, all of it was finally in the light. Jenny's questions forced accountability, and even without confrontation, the rules of their relationship had shifted. Fans online were buzzing, debating, and waiting with bated breath for what would happen next. Next time, we'll see how this silence shapes what comes after, and whether patience finally pays off or collapses completely. You do not want to miss what unfolds when years of waiting finally collide with a single question.